Florida looks good
Thank
on you.
you. I love Florida.
You're
Florida's
like,
been good. I wish
yeah.
I came earlier. I still visit New York a lot, but it's pretty. I mean, I got palm trees outside my window, Farnoosh. What could be better? Palm trees and a swimming pool.
Bobbi Rebell,
I
welcome to
know.
So Money, making me jealous before we even start with the first question. But it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. And let's remind everybody you're coming from beautiful Montclair, New Jersey, hot real estate market where it's also an amazing place to live.
Well, fun fact, a home in our neighborhood that is a mansion that is often featured on TV. I think it was on the Netflix movie, in the Netflix movie with Jennifer Lopez. It's constantly being like scouted for the next film, the next commercial. It just sold for $8.1 million. I know, like what? I don't think I've ever seen in person an $8.1 million home in my life. We don't know who bought it. I'm hoping it's a Nick, a basketball player, or who at that level, like who could it be? It's not going to be like a doctor, or a podcaster for that matter. It's going to be maybe someone famous. That's what I'm hoping.
Maybe someone famous. Maybe. You're going to have to investigate and get to the bottom of that because I know you have a
Yeah.
very popular local podcast that
We're
will
on
get to
top
the
of that.
bottom of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're investigating as we speak. But enough about that. Let's talk about you, Bobbi. You have been on this show many times. You're one of my faves, and you have some news. You have a Yet again, Bobbi never sleeps, everybody. She's done it all. And now she is a certified financial therapist. I want to spend some time exploring this world with our audience and your role in it. But tell us a little bit about this journey, this latest chapter in your professional life.
Well, as many journeys go, this journey was a little bit longer than I had expected. So when we last saw each other in person, it was actually a couple of years ago, just before I moved to Florida. And I told you I was working towards becoming a certified financial therapist. I was very afraid to take the test because I, like many people, have a serious fear of failure. Even though I did pass the certified financial planner test, which was really, really hard. There is a very difficult test for the certified financial therapist, and there is a self-study available, and that's what I was looking at the time. And what I decided to do was take the long road. I don't know if you know Dory Clark. She wrote about
Yeah.
taking the long way. And so very inspired by her, I sort of stopped what I was doing and decided to look into how to really understand what financial therapy was about rather than just sort of doing this quick self-study and trying to pass a test and get there faster. I decided to take the long road. And so I got to know the Financial Therapy Association, the people behind it. I actually interviewed the woman who was the head of it at the time, Dr. Megan Ford, who's out of, I believe, University of Georgia right now, and really was inspired and enrolled in Kansas State in their graduate school and spent a year actually in school. Probably the oldest grad student they have, but it was a lot of fun being with a lot of the younger folks, although there were some people that were mid-career like myself, and really understanding what the field of financial therapy was about, because so much of the decision-making that goes on with respect to money is really driven by not only emotion, but also fear and anxiety, and also how our relationships influence our money decisions. Who else will be impacted consciously or unconsciously? And of course, how we frame those decisions. So many people would come up to me after workshops, Farnoosh, and say, well, I'm just so bad with money, so this was great. And I'll say, well, so what are you going to do? And they're still sort of frozen because they understand, or they understood when I was giving these more factual presentations, they understood the facts. But getting there from a behavioral and an emotional standpoint was proving really difficult. We may have a lot of willpower, but we don't always have awareness to get us there. And it can be frustrating for people. And so financial therapy can help people make those connections and get where they need to be in terms of their mindset so that they can really make a better decision when it comes down to the math.
So let me get this straight. You were a student back in a classroom for a year?
It was virtual.
Okay.
Although it was interesting. Kansas State, they did offer to have me come. I was, invited to the physical graduation, which is interesting. And I do have a student ID, which worked last week. I was in New York City visiting friends, and I went into MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. And I was like, I wonder if this student ID will work or if they'll give me a second look, because I obviously don't look like, I'm a 22-year-old student. And no problem, half price off. So that was a nice fringe benefit from enrolling in school so late in life.
I love that. Lifelong learner, this Bobbi Rebell.
And
But
getting those student discounts, yes.
Yeah, and I think Apple and H&M, and there's a lot of places
Yeah,
you could bank on
I'm
that.
gonna work it. Yeah.
Was there a moment though for you where you remember thinking to yourself, this is where I want to hang out for the next while. I need to be a financial therapist." Like what was it actually that personally drew you to it? We know of course there's a need, there's an underserved market, emotions cloud so much of our financial judgment and our relationships, but for you, what was it?
I think it's more of a gradual realization that a lot of the times emotion is clouding not only our decisions, but I have a lot of friends that are certified financial planners or financial advisors. And as I would tell them about my fascination with financial therapy, they would start confessing to me that they have clients that are making these irrational decisions. And they would tell their clients very rationally, here is the math. Here is the budget you need to be on. Here's the trajectory of what is going to happen if you keep choosing these maybe less risky investments in many cases. They wanted to be more careful with their money and weren't maybe investing in stocks, or they were hesitant. They weren't listening to their advisor's advice. They weren't executing what they would yes them in the meeting, and then things just wouldn't happen, right? Think how many people you've probably encountered that say, oh, yes, I should go do a will, but they don't do the will because doing a will might, if you really get down to it, might tap into their fear of mortality, right? There's
Mhm.
always these sort of reasons why people aren't doing what they say or they intend or they know they should be doing. And one of the interesting sayings that came up over and over again for me in studying financial therapy was all decisions make sense. All behavior makes sense, I should say. All behavior makes sense with enough information.
Mhm.
So think about that. All behavior makes sense with enough information. So somebody may do something completely irrational. But if you go back and you really go dig deep into everything going on that is influencing that decision, it will start to make sense.
Yeah.
You might not agree with it, but it'll make
No,
sense
I
why
mean,
they made that
I
decision.
understand. No, for sure. Very different for you to be in a meeting,
Yeah.
right? Listening to people unpack their feelings. What's your approach to helping people? I imagine it's, as you say, it's very different than giving them a budget or a spreadsheet. But where do you start? What are the questions that you ask?
It's less about the questions and more about letting them finish what they want to say. Usually, people, if you just give them an opening, are going to say a lot more than if you keep peppering them with questions, right? And that goes back to my days being a TV anchor. I was a business news anchor for years. And very often, one of my techniques would be to ask them a question, let them finish their thought, and then not ask a follow up. I would just let there be silence, right? And very often, another answer came out that was even better than the first and that said more because people often want to fill that sort of silence. And so by listening, it's actually a technique called exquisite listening that we learn about. And by allowing them to speak more and really focusing on what they're saying and just only asking the tiniest question to get them to keep telling you more and sharing more and themselves becoming more aware. As they're saying this, they're increasing their own awareness of what's going on. And to a large degree, they come upon their own solutions and their own strategies simply by revealing what's really going on. So, for example, you might think about the way that people bid on property when there's a housing situation and different bidders come in. Real estate agents can be very crafty in how they approach people. Who among us hasn't been at, say, an open house, and the realtor will be like, well, if you're really interested, if you're a serious bidder, you're going to come in at least at full ask, if not above. But good luck to you. But if you want it, if you don't want it, do what you want. These psychological games where they're framing how you should bid. And then you go to your spouse or whoever's near you, and they're going to frame how you might approach it, right? And that goes into something called systems theory, where we are all reactive to the people that are around us in different situations. So if you visit, a store with your friend, you might behave very differently than if you visit with Colette, or if you visit with a parent, or
Yeah.
if you visit with a business associate, right? What, what, think about what you would gravitate towards if you were with a friend that you, for whatever reason, wanted to think that you had a lot of money versus somebody who you wanted to impress with your frugality. You might behave
Right.
very differently in different situations depending on who is with you. And it's fascinating when you think about the kind of behavior that comes to the surface.
I'm laughing because this morning, my 12-year-old, he sits me down. He goes, "Mom, I want to ask you a question, something I think you've talked about on your podcast."
Boy, he's listening. First of all, that's a win. He's listening.
I know, well, let's be honest, he's probably just catching me record and he's in the other room on his iPad. But he goes, "When you go on a date, first date, who pays?" And I said, and I just said, "Yeah, well, usually the person who initiates the date. So if you ask out a girl or you ask out a boy, you pay or you offer to pay, you initiate the pay. And if they say no, that makes me feel uncomfortable or there's a little back and forth, like then you can, you feel the room. Like don't make anyone feel uncomfortable for you paying." He goes, "Okay." He's like, "I think on the second date, though, they should pay." And then I was like, I don't know what to say to that because to your point, like relationships will sort of steer you in certain directions, right? Like even that couple on a date. I mean, you're just reading the room to kind of figure out like what's the temperature here? Like what am I supposed to do? And a lot of people get confused about how to relate about with money with others because we all come from different places in life. And this is opening up a whole new can of worms like couples and money. But do you often work with couples as well or bring in the partner into the room to kind of get to the bottom of things?
So I primarily work in workshops. So I'm
Mhm.
not working with couples, but we did have a whole class on relationships and money. And our guest speakers at one point were, I think you know them, is Doug and Heather Bonaparte. I think I'm saying their name
Yes,
right, who
yes.
wrote Money Together, which I highly recommend to your listeners as a great book if they are looking for that kind of advice and to definitely tune into their content. I think they're really wonderful. And my teacher for that was Megan McCoy. So hi, Megan, who was an inspiration to me. She's the teaching the group at Kansas State. I can't say enough wonderful things about. I learned so much about, but a whole focus was on relationships and money and this whole idea of systems theory and how we all relate to each other and how that influences our relationship with money and the way that we behave. And it is fascinating.
Hmm. All right. Speaking of your workshops, there's one of your workshops is about your brain on money. What are some of the hidden biases that you see a lot of us, subconsciously, consciously absorbing that then drives our financial decisions?
Yeah, such a good question. So there's 5 biases that I highlight in the workshop. So one of them is anchoring, and that is think about when you go into this. This fascinated me. One of my teenage jobs was working at a department store, and sometimes we had to do inventory, and the clothing would come out pre-printed with one price, and then it would be crossed out, and it would look like it was handwritten in a lower price. And the idea was that the shopper would anchor to the higher price and think that they were getting a better price. And people do this. We talk about real estate. Sometimes an agent might purposely price a property at a certain price so that people feel like they're getting a deal. So you price it much higher than it would ever go for. And then you cut the price, let's say 2 weeks later, and it might bring in a whole new set of buyers because they think, wow, I can get this. And it creates a feeding frenzy and people get emotional and they start bidding above it, but think they're still getting a deal. So we anchor to a number. Same thing when we're investing in stocks, for example. We might anchor to a price that we purchased it at and really be reluctant to sell it below that price, even if it's never going to go back to the original price that we bought it at. I mean, can you relate to this at all?
I was just laughing though, because in Montclair, I feel like agents do the reverse, where the price
Yeah.
anchor is a very low bottom. Like what the Montclair math for buying in this area is they'll price it like let's say they want the house to go for 1 million or 1.3, they will price it at like 799. And yeah, because then that gets a lot of people in. Think about it. A lot of like that's a good price for maybe a first time buyer. I know that sounds wild to say, but here we are, guys. This is 2026. And that initiates a bidding war usually.
Hmm.
And then you look at comp prices and you're like, oh, well, the neighboring house sold for 1.2. How could this be 800,000? So they use a lot of psychology in this market, but sometimes in unexpected ways, but it works.
Yeah. And so another bias is just to go through the 5 on the loss aversion, recency bias, status quo, and then herd mentality. And
Herd
herd
mentality.
mentality is, I mean, yeah, you know exactly what herd
That's
mentality
like,
is.
do you remember the 2008 Great Recession?
Yeah.
So I wrote a book called Psych Yourself Rich, which reminds me that this whole body of personal finance science is new. it's relatively new when you think about for how long we have been, approaching finances in a purely mathematical way forever. This world of behavioral psychology applied to the financial world, I think the Nobel Prize for it only went out in the early aughts, like 2000, I want to say like early 2000s, because then I wrote a book about it and came out in like 2010. And it was one of the first looks at some of this research that people like Daniel Kahneman and others had done that looked at, oh, hey, by the way, as a human being, you make completely irrational decisions around money. And here's some examples of it. And herd mentality was something that we would talk about because we saw it happen in the housing bubble bursting and crashing, people just buying homes because that's what everybody was doing. And even meme stocks, right? People,
Mhm.
buying whatever it was, GameStop, because that was what the Reddit thread said you should do.
Yeah. Look, herd mentality. Also, a lot of this is just awareness. So, for example, herd mentality. Nvidia. A lot of people were buying it because a lot of people were buying it, and it was going up because a lot of people were buying it. And by the way, I bought it. Okay, and I know my son-in-law bought it, and a lot of people bought it just because they heard the buzz. That doesn't mean it's not a good company to invest in, right? So you talk about GameStop. Okay, maybe that company, if you look at the fundamentals, was not going to hold its value based on fundamentals. Doesn't mean you couldn't make money on it, because people do make money on stocks through momentum all the time. So the question is, are you aware of why it's going up? If you're aware GameStop is going up just because of herd mentality, and you, eyes wide open, decide, I'm going to day trade, I'm going to do it, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to wait my moment, I'm going to flip it, I understand the risks, that's fine. So a lot of this is about awareness and understanding. This is an emotional decision. This is psychological, math driven. It is not. GameStop
Yeah.
logically should not be going up, but Nvidia maybe should go up. And so
Hmm.
it's important to separate that and not say just because you're buying something in a herd mentality, the herd mentality is not always wrong. Sometimes a restaurant is crowded because it's really good. Sometimes it's just crowded because it was on Instagram. I mean, I've been to New York City a few times recently, and it boggles the mind, the Instagram lines. Like, you go by these places and I'll be like, what's up with the line? Like, I literally walk up to people, I'm like, what's up with the line? And they'll
Yeah.
be like, it was on Instagram yesterday and everybody
Oh my
came down to
God.
check it out. And I'm
People
like, are
have
we still doing
nothing to
this?
do. I was in
They
New York
don't, because
and
they
there
work from
were,
home. So they're sort of working with their
uh,
phones, and they're online at whatever, pastry shop has got the
Greek
hot thing.
yogurt ice cream. That's what I saw a line for
Yes,
the other day. What the
I
heck?
saw that too downtown. Maybe the same place, but I don't know. But again, people work from home, so they can sort of be working, and the boss doesn't know that they're answering whatever needs to be
Well,
answered,
it's
standing online for
also,
Greek yogurt.
the herd mentality also is adjacent to fear of missing out.
Yep.
But let's talk about fear in general, because obviously this is where I lived for a number of years while I was writing A Healthy State of Panic. How often do you see fear show up? And what are the kinds of fear? What are the people afraid of when it comes to money?
People are afraid of so many different things, but more than you would think, there's a lot of social pressure when it comes to making financial decisions. And people are very afraid of making a decision that embarrasses them, that they would feel shame about. And that's why people, for example, hide debt from their peer group. They don't want to have that social negativity.
Hmm.
People want to be accepted by their friends. They want to be seen as being competent, knowing making the right decisions. And so very often they will, for example, participate, let's say, in a group dinner that they maybe shouldn't, because they don't want people to know. So fear of not being included, fear of just social, I don't want to say,
Rejection,
rejection is a good word. Judgment.
isolation. Yeah.
Isolation, judgment, community is such an important thing to us, more than we really realize, especially as we get older. There's all kinds of studies that show that community is what keeps people healthy
Hmm.
more than many other things, that having that social safety net, whether it's family, friends, or just general community resources, and feeling accepted, feeling part of something. And very often our financial decisions are driven by a fear of losing that social acceptance. And like you said, fear of rejection. So we won't want to say, well, I can't participate in that thing because it doesn't make sense for me financially, or they don't want people to know there's been a rocky period in their career. Maybe we hide
Hmm.
this, and that causes so much anxiety.
I think a lot of people also feel guilt around being forced into financial choices that they don't necessarily want to make, but here we are, whether it's because of medical bills, family obligations, they lose their job. How do you suggest someone reframe all of that so that they can feel better about a choice that they didn't really get to make freely?
Yeah, I love the way that you're framing that because that's exactly it. It wasn't actually a choice. People will come to me and they will say, I'm so embarrassed I made this mistake. Or they'll say, I'm so ashamed I did this. But when you get down to it, and again, you let them keep talking and do your exquisite listening, as we say, it comes out that in fact it wasn't a choice. It was something that happened to them. And so what I often have people do, and even write this down, is make a column of things that were out of your control and things that are in your control. And that's a complicated thing in our society. And I don't want to get into a whole conversation about what economic structure is best. I do believe in capitalism with some social safety nets, but part of what's driving a lot of anxiety, financial anxiety in our broader society these days is that there are systemic things that happen to people that they cannot control. And that can be incredibly frustrating. We, for example, cannot control interest rates. You just can't. You can have a good credit score and get the best interest rate and the best financial deal you can when you're taking out a loan. But if you have to take out a loan, you are going to have to live with those interest rates, and there's nothing you can do to change that. And so people have to sort of make peace with that. You talk about the housing market, what are the levers that you can control? You can control to some degree, let's say how much down payment you can save. You can control where you choose to live and the pricing in that area, but you can't control the interest rates. There's just
Mhm.
nothing you can do about that. And you can't control to a large degree the percentage of that you have to put down. And you can't control always the many of the costs associated with that home, like, for example, the real estate taxes. Those are things that are out of your control that may change and get more expensive. And you can't control those. So you have to look at what are the levers that I can control and what are the things that I can't control. And as I said, even writing them down, this is not in my control, can really relieve a lot of the anxiety because you can just see this is not my fault. We do a lot of blaming ourselves. And again, I love that you use the word choices. They're not choices. They're
Mhm.
not choices. And so we have to look at the actual decisions that we can make for ourselves and where we can exert control and make peace with it. That sometimes things are just kind of going to be not great. And we
Yeah.
have to focus forward and understand that that doesn't mean we did anything wrong.
And movement is sometimes better than staying put, right? Even if
Yeah.
you make a move that's not ideal, there's a lot to grow still from that experience. And as my friend always says, you make a decision and then you
Yep.
can make another one. It's not
Yes.
decisions aren't finite in most cases.
No. Yeah, I mean, I know people that look, I made a huge geographic move. It was economically fortuitous, but it wasn't driven purely by economics. But we moved and we moved from a place where our mortgage interest rate doubled. Let's just say the interest rate on our mortgage. We gave up a very low interest mortgage and we went into a different one because that was my life choice. And I don't want my life choices to be driven purely by numbers. Right. And I think it's
Mhm.
important for people to make peace with that you make the best decision you can. And going back to all behavior can be explained with enough information. The information is, well, this is where I want to spend my time. This is where I want to put my energy. This is where I want my community to be going forward for this next phase of my life. And if it's not right, you can move again. And there are plenty of people who may be saddled, for example, they might be house poor. Well, you know what? Maybe just sell the damn house and live somewhere else. It's okay. Life goes on, right? If you've ever had a job loss, if you've ever had, and that is again a choice that was not your choice to make, you realize that you get up and it's just another day.
Yeah.
And you make the best decision you can among the things that you can control. And you might decide to look for another job. You might decide to create your own business. You might decide to just take a break if that's something that's available to you, but you can only choose among a certain amount of choices.
Right.
Right. With the available information that you have and the available resources that you have. And unfortunately, sometimes those are limited. And just know that because adding anxiety to the pile isn't really all that helpful. It's hard
Mhm.
though.
Speaking of anxiety being added to the pile, social media, right?
Yes.
Influencing, all of that. Talk a little bit about, because you have another workshop on this as
Yes.
well, how the algorithm wants us to be broke.
Yes.
And I don't think the advice is never go on social media. I think that's unrealistic, although I know people who attempt it and they're much happier. But I think, for the general population, and myself included. I don't think there's a world where I can be off social media. So how do we create guardrails for ourselves, and what is it that you want us to be conscientious of as we're scrolling?
So you want to be conscientious of how the media is shaping how you are seeing the world and understanding that this is a highlight reel for many people. And the other thing, someone recently said this to me, that we use the word influencers. That's not inaccurate. But really, what are they? They are digital salespeople. So if you think about that, these influencers that you're seeing, they are there to sell you things. And once you reframe it that way, you'll see them very differently. It doesn't mean, again, to the point where we were talking about that NVIDIA might be a good stock, even though it was, to some degree, a meme stock. Just because someone's selling you something doesn't mean it's not something you want. And if you want to buy it, that's okay. So number one, don't feel like you did something wrong if you do buy something from a digital salesperson. That's okay. But just understand that that's what is going on. And that when you go on there, just like any other media, it is powered by ads. And that is how we pay for it, basically. And you are the product. And so understanding that you're seeing it through that, you can be a much more intentional and thoughtful media consumer. And again, also understand that you are a media consumer when you
Mhm.
are looking at this. And if you want to only see your friends, you have to really go into the algorithm. And sometimes, depending on which platform, you can focus more on friends. But some of these, like a TikTok, that is really driven by your interests, not
Yeah.
your friends. So understand what you're consuming and control it. I also would recommend also just setting a timer
Yeah.
if you can and
And
just get off.
I have a
Post
rule
and
of
ghost if
thumb.
you have to be on it too. I try to do that.
I try not to click through links for buying things on these platforms. If I see something that I like, that I want to learn more about, I will go to the website. And even in that transition, believe it or not, like the dopamine levels drop and you can see what you were looking at in a broader context as opposed to just this single frame, one person telling you these are the best shorts she's ever owned. Like
Yeah.
you can go onto the website and see how they actually fit, how they look on real people. Maybe there's a better price. I don't know. But just that transition. And I guess the takeaway is distance helps before you make a purchase. Like, don't be in that zone of scrolling, doom scrolling when you're making a purchase. Cause I'm not a scientist, but I'll tell you, or a doctor, but I know for sure that we are not in the best medically,
No.
it's like relaxed mind.
Yeah, I get pulled in all the time and it's really dangerous. I have absolutely bought things through Instagram and TikTok and they're fine. It's never been a huge purchase and it's okay. But is it as great as they said? Usually not. So, one thing I've tried to do, and first of all, I love your technique. I think that's great. Take a step away, go to the actual website, look at it more thoughtfully, more intentionally. You can also just save it for later. Just
Yeah.
click the save and say, I'll come back if I really want it. You'll probably forget about it. But also, if you really want it and it fits your needs and you can afford it, it's also okay to buy it. It's okay. I don't want people having that shame. So that's an important thing in what I always teach is it's okay. It's okay. Because otherwise people are going to hide what they did because they bought something.
You
And
mean
you
like
have to let them know it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That tripod you bought or that light for your phone so you would look better, it's okay. The light
yeah,
is probably just fine. It's okay. Or all those you know what I get sucked into now, and I'm sure your listeners can relate. All of these they say these Amazon finds that are cheaper versions of
the
the
dupes.
dupes of like the home furnishings and things like that because we're still decorating our new home. And so, Restoration Hardware has all this stuff that looks beautiful, but it's very expensive. And so you've got all these Amazon dupes and you have these influencers slash digital salespeople that will have this list of 20 things that look just like the Restoration Hardware or Crate and Barrel or whatever store they pick that are on Amazon. And they say, put in your name, send me it or something in the comments and they'll send it to you. And I will see, this is interesting, I will see friends of mine that
Yeah.
have done it in the comments. And that influences me. It's like, okay, well, if she
Yeah.
wanted to do that, maybe it is okay to buy the knockoff. I'll see, a friend that I think is kind of fancy and she's got the dupes going. And it kind of gives you permission to say, okay, maybe the dupe is okay. It's
The
fascinating
endorsement.
how influenced we are by our peer group and the financial decisions that they make that sort of give us permission. If
all
you
the time.
see, someone that you know is super wealthy and they're driving a car that's a very economical car, you kind of go, "Yeah, I can do that too." It doesn't matter. It doesn't show whether
Yeah.
you have money or not to be driving, I don't know, I'm not a car person, but to be driving this inexpensive car. Good for them. Or you know
Love.
somebody that's driving a fancy car. I don't know. It all plays in.
Maybe that's why I love when people are like, "Oh, I love your like this sweater that I'm wearing." I'll be like, "It's from Zara."
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
hate me for the fast fashion, but it was only, $39 and,
Right.
it's a dupe
Yeah.
actually of like a much more expensive sweater.
Yeah.
I wanna
Or
ask
just say thank you
or
and
just
let
say
them
thank
wonder
you, but I wanna
and let
encourage
them
people
wonder.
to know that it's okay to
Yes.
go for the deal.
I like that.
I want to ask you because you wrote a book, your last book was called Launching Financial Grownups. I just read a recent story that said that something like 49% of adults under the age of 30 are living at home with their parents. And I would just want to get your hot take on that. In my generation, when I was in my 20s, I feel like it was looked down upon, especially if you were college educated and seemingly mature. Like, why are you living at home? You should be out on your own. This is your moment. Like, you have to flee the nest. But tell me what you think about this trend happening now.
I think the number may be even higher than that statistic shows, first of all. I think it's how you define living at home. Living at home might be, as in the case of our kids, we had both my stepdaughter and stepson lived at home for 2 years, planned to save up money so that they could then launch themselves independently. The older one bought a home, which is detailed in Launching Financial Grownups. She actually wrote a really great, I think the highlight of the book for anyone that picks it up is the epilogue written from Ashley. It killed me not to change a word, but it is pure Ashley and it's awesome. And she had great money tips, by the way, that were new to even me. So go, Ashley. And then Bradley now has his apartment and he's evolving in his career. But it was very intentional and deliberate, and I think very productive for them. I think where you run into trouble is when kids are living at home and not with intention, not with an exit strategy. And I write in the book about having an exit strategy, that they're living at home, but with purpose. And I think that it's a great thing. It's a wonderful gift that parents can give to their children, especially if they can't just write them a check for a down payment. And that's a whole controversial, can of worms in and of itself. But if you can't write them a check, or even if you will eventually, living at home as an adult is a great transition period because they can learn from you how they want to shape their financial life because you're
Mhm.
going to model for them how you manage your finances. They're going to understand a lot more than, let's say, they were on a path where they went to college from age 18 to 22. So they sort of cut off that experience at 18, and you probably weren't sharing a lot financially with them before they went to college. If they went to college, right? So they come back at 22. And this happened a lot during the pandemic, which was actually a great educational experience for many young adults, even though it wasn't intended to be, because they suddenly were living with their parents unexpectedly as adults and seeing their parents in a very different light and maybe having a new perspective on or any perspective on their parents' finances. Because as children, most of us don't even think about our parents' finances. It's something that we just kind of take for granted unless they actively tell us what's going on in their financial life, which is really, in my opinion, not usually necessary. So
Mhm.
I think it can be a great opportunity for parents to teach their kids. I do think that around age 26, for me, is a time when they should be exiting. And that's something I'm very candid with in the book. The book is really for parents of kids age 18 to 26. And I say 26 because 26 is become sort of the default. I think it used to be 22 when they got out of college when we were younger. Now it's 26, in large part because of the gig economy that's evolved because of the ACA, because kids can be on their parents' insurance until they're 26. So it gives a little more breathing room for them to figure out what they're doing career wise. But my hope is that by your late 20s, you are, if not exiting, at least having an exit strategy. And I am, and anyone who reads my book will know, I am very supportive of parents helping if they feel the kids are going to be responsible with that money and it doesn't derail the parents' financial goals and plans, because I think that life is hard. And I think that
Yeah.
goes to the whole idea of financial therapy, that we shouldn't be ashamed. If we have the ability to help our kids with a down payment for a home or whatever milestone we can help with, we should, because life is really hard. And to the point of you talk about your hometown's pricing on housing, it's really expensive. And we can say, well, we did it, they should do it too. Okay, maybe. but maybe our parents couldn't help us. Maybe it would have been nicer if they did help us a little bit and make it a little bit easier. I think it's nice to be nice.
Not to
So,
mention
you know?
the boomers have had it pretty well. They've been very fortunate in a lot of ways for things that were not within their control, right? They didn't control the stock market, the job market, the housing market, social security, pensions. They had access to all of these things in a positive way, in a growth way, whereas their children and their children's children, it was not a straight line. And I'm not saying every boomer had it easy, but
No.
relatively, we know the data, like generationally, the boomers. I mean, I love these memes where it's just like these relaxing boomers like square dancing, and while the world is on fire.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and back to the point where I talked about, you said choices, and I said, well, the truth is a lot of these things are systemic. A lot of the challenges that young people today face are out of their control. They are systemic. They cannot control the fact that the price points for housing are so out of line with what they can earn. They also are in a world where the gig economy has become so prevalent that very often for years after graduating college, if they do go to college, because that's a whole other can of worms with the cost of college these days, and there's some changes going on with student loans right now, which are going to be interesting to see how that actually evolves depending on what you want to study. It's harder. It is objectively harder because it used to be that companies would, let's say, offer health insurance
Mhm.
right away. And a big company does, but maybe a startup doesn't. And certainly if you're working in the gig economy, health insurance is really challenging and extremely expensive and often really bad. And so it makes sense if you can keep your kid on your health insurance until they're 26. And there's some small loopholes a little bit that give you some wiggle room after, but it's not available to many people. And it does make sense if you can help your kids with education and so on. It is really rough out there.
Wow. It is. It really
I don't wanna
is.
be
And
such a downer, but I also think that it's important that we don't shame young people because it is objectively hard. It is hard, and also career paths used to be much more linear, and now the definition of a job, so many of the jobs that people have didn't even exist when we were in school, some even when they were in school, and, AI is evolving the
I mean,
job market. I don't think it's gonna kill things, but it's changing things a lot.
look at what we're doing. We're podcasting. This did not exist when I went to college, at least in this
Yeah,
format. I mean, obviously, media did and radio did, and even
not
financial
from our
therapy,
homes.
not from our homes, that's for sure.
No,
And even
no.
financial therapy is a relatively new area in personal finance
It is. It's about
advice.
15 years old. And I do want to say, so one of the people that turned me on to it was Dr. Brad Klontz. I had a podcast with Joe Saul-Sehy, and we had periodic co-hosts. And one of them for me was Dr. Brad Klontz. And he's really one of the sort of fathers, along with his father, Ted Klontz, of financial therapy. And one thing that Dr. Brad Klontz talks about is money scripts. So money scripts are things that inform how we approach money. So there are four main money scripts that Dr. Brad Klontz talks about. So he talks about money avoidance. He talks about money worship, which is sort of saying that money is the key to all happiness. He talks about money status, which is sort of the idea of buying things to create status in your community. And then the final one is money vigilance, which is sort of people that are super frugal. And these four ideas, these four money scripts, I think were sort of the foundation of
Mhm.
financial therapy less than 2 decades ago, really.
Wow. Amazing.
So it's a very new field and it's something that is evolving. And the Financial Therapy Association is growing a lot. I went to their conference actually for the second time. And it was like a record turnout. I think they had more than 500 people there, and it was eye-opening. I mean, the presentations were phenomenal, and I highly encourage people to check out the Financial Therapy Association, especially if you are looking for a financial therapist. I don't take individual clients right now. It is something that I'm considering, but right now I'm focused primarily on workshop. But if you are looking for a financial therapist, check out the Financial Therapy Association.
Or tell your HR department to call Bobby and
Yes.
put together a workshop.
Yes. And I will say, if you do connect me with your HR department or your event planning department for your company, I will do an individual financial therapy coaching session just for you. So
Nice.
make the connection and we will have a really great one-on-one and we can talk about whatever is on your mind.
Bobbi Rebell, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Always a pleasure. Congratulations on your new professional certification. Is it a degree? Is it a license? Is like what? How do we classify this?
It is a certification. So I have a certification through Kansas State and then the Financial Therapy Association is the governing body for being a certified financial therapist. So I'm a certified financial therapist through the FTA.
Amazing. So inspiring. Bobbi Rebell, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, as always.